But in circumstances such as this, there is no place I'd rather be than here with my UCSF colleagues, people who I know to be wise, caring, creative in problem solving, and constantly advocating for those who are the most vulnerable in our communities. Today, we have gathered a group of UCSF faculty, students, residents, staff leaders, and community leaders to reflect on what's happening in our nation and our local communities. We have selected both formal leaders with impressive titles and leaders who lead with influence through their scholarship, advocacy, work, and daily activities at UCSF. We want this session to be meaningful to all of you who have come and chosen to spend their evening with us here. Whether you're here to feel solidarity and solace in joining together with like-minded individuals, or whether you come seeking wisdom from your leaders and from your peers and colleagues at UCSF, or whether you come to provide information to us that might help us to move forward. As you listen tonight, we invite you either to just reflect and take the time to be with others, or to share thoughts and suggestions for future work that we might undertake as an institution and a collective of people truly committed to achieving equity and justice in our communities. We ask that if you have advice or commentary, that you use the Q&A button at the bottom of your Zoom panel and provide us with that information. We will not have time in today's schedule to answer specific questions, but all commentary will be forwarded to the appropriate leader or group that your recommendation suggests. I do want to acknowledge that while we have a social media tag, #UCSF United Against Racism, we do realize that today has been identified as Blackout Tuesday on social media, and we want to make our allies aware that it is a day for allies to decenter ourselves and to listen to Black voices on social media and to amplify their concerns, their voices, their needs, and the demands of this movement that we find ourselves in. Allies, please refrain from social media posts that are self-promoting and use any post that you choose to make to uplift members of the Black community. We hope that those who do want to use social media will use the hashtag UCSF United Against Racism so that we may collect and collate those thoughts and ideas within our community. And now I'd like to turn the podium over to Dean Talmadge King for the first presentation.
Good evening, and thank you for joining this town hall. These are very challenging times. We have seen a drastic increase in violence disorders from Lebanon to Hong Kong, from Iraq to Chile, in Yemen and Syria, Somalia and Afghanistan, and a cartel insurgency in Mexico. We've seen massive economic inequality, the emergence of a global health crisis, and growing discrimination and intolerance. Tonight, we grieve the tragic deaths of George Floyd, Ahmaud Arbery, Breonna Taylor, and the countless others who have been killed at the hands of structural racism. I'm speaking on behalf of the leadership of the UCSF Health Professions Schools, the Graduate Division, and the Program in Physical Therapy. UCSF is an organization that I'm proud to say has been coming far in uncovering and addressing structural oppression in many of our institutional structures and systems. We are also committed to using our skills and voices to continue working against these forces. The world is fighting an uphill battle against a virus about which little was known just a few months ago. Fear of the unknown can be paralyzing. From the onset of the COVID-19 pandemic, fear has been ever present, not just about the virus itself, but among us equally, and not among us equally. From reports of racism against people of Asian descent to the unacceptable disparities in access to and quality of health care. There was much cause for fear. At the same time, we saw our own UCSF students, doctors, nurses, staff, and volunteers act with courage, selflessness, and compassion in the communities we serve and across the country. We nurtured a growing sense of community, which gave us the optimism and hope to press on. And then, in the midst of that solidarity, we experienced the resurgence of another deadly infestation, that of racism, in all its age-old shapes and forms. We've attempted to address it, but being America's original sin, we have not brought forth all the resources needed for a solution. As I reflect on these tragic events and the domino effect they have had, I know that many members of the UCSF community feel fear in their daily lives because of the injustices that they have personally experienced or witnessed. And I worry about the detrimental impact fear has been proven to have on our health. This is in stark opposition to what we at UCSF have pledged to accomplish in advancing health worldwide. My biggest fear is that of the status quo, of continued silence and oppression that will invariably lead to more destruction. As a community, we must do what we can to replace fear with hope and hope with action. Now, half a century after the death of an American hero, Martin Luther King Jr., we do well to consider his wise prophecy. The arc of the moral universe is long, but it bends towards justice. But the bending toward justice does not result from the forces of gravity or by accident. That arc is pulled toward justice by forces both revolutionary and evolutionary. It bends because of work that people and communities accomplish. People actually drive the structures that are racist, and racist structures can augment interpersonal racism. Societal inequities impact patients, staff, faculty, and learners, and interpersonal and structural racism feed on one another. As an institution, we must recommit to contributing to bending the trajectory of the arc of the moral universe toward justice. We have the knowledge, the expertise, and the drive of people who can help us work on evolutionary and revolutionary change so that our medical community reflects the diversity of our patient population and our communities, our learners are educated in a way that actively combats the adverse outcomes that directly result from structural and interpersonal discrimination. I don't believe that any one person has the right answer, but with the right vision, carefully considered goals, and hearts full of hope, I'm confident that the medical profession can join others in our community to honor Dr. King's legacy and achieve our goal that all Americans have the opportunity to make choices that allow them to live a long, healthy life, regardless of their income, education, or ethnic background. Do we have the courage and vision to do this? I say yes. Even as I worry, I see rays of hope and encouragement. UCSF has made tremendous strides to become the most diverse, equitable, and inclusive academic medical system in the country. I believe that united for justice and equity against the forces that threaten us will allow us to overcome. We are here to listen and support each other. We know there's always room for improvement. And as Goethe said, knowing is not enough, we must apply. Willing is not enough, we must do. Thank you for joining us tonight.
Thank you, Dean King. I'd like to turn the podium over to Dr. Renee Navarro, Vice Chancellor for Diversity and Outreach. Dr. Navarro.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Lucey, and thank you, Dr. King. Good evening to everyone who has joined the Zoom call. Unfortunately, it is necessary at this time that we come together as a community to honor the lives of those who have been lost, to acknowledge the long-standing pain and suffering that many of us have experienced for far too long, and to grieve these immediate circumstances. We stand together in horror as we see the ravages of the pandemic and its disproportionate effect on communities of color, elders, and other vulnerable groups, and the acts of racism, discrimination, and specifically the anti-Blackness that continues to shock us. Sadly, we have seen this before. The killing of young Black people is not new to America, and we need to take the time to honor and remember them. Most recently, George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, Ahmaud Arbery, and Tony McDade, and the countless other individuals who have been killed simply because of who they are. The blatant way that anti-Blackness shows up in our society takes me back personally to being a 4-year-old child in the Jim Crow South. Even at such a young age, I knew things were not fair. And I know now that that really dates my earliest childhood trauma. The lifelong experiences of microaggressions, lack of inclusion, and witnessing the killing and abuse of people of color repeat and confound those traumas. Their lives mattered to their families, to their friends, and to the world. Just imagine their grieving parents and siblings, how they must be feeling right now. Harrowing anguish and an endless sorrow. Life is precious, and who knows that better and thinks about it more seriously than those of us who work in the health sciences. As a community, we're dedicated to improving health worldwide. We at UCSF actually need to do much more than honor and remember. We need to act. We need to speak up, and we need to work continuously to eradicate structural racism and the systems of injustice that lead to disparity, sickness, and to death. Because this is a crisis that impacts everyone, as we are all tied together in one common humanity. From the founding of the UCSF Black Caucus over 50 years ago, we have made progress. We made tremendous progress, but there is much left to be done to dismantle the barriers to full representation and enthusiastic inclusion of all groups, including minorities, women, LGBT individuals, people with disabilities, and others who have been marginalized right here at UCSF. This work is not easy. It's heavy. It requires courage. It starts with the examination of our own biases, followed by engaging in difficult conversations together. Then we must come together to continue to challenge systemic structural racism and discrimination. The insidious and pernicious ways that bias show up require our ongoing vigilance. I have witnessed the broad campus engagement, and I've seen such positive change over my time here. I believe in the people, the principles, and the values that comprise UCSF and our ability to continue and to accelerate the disruption of the status quo. We stand committed to action and accountability to our learners, staff, faculty, patients, and to our community. We recognize that we are stronger together, and I thank you for this opportunity to address you tonight, and I thank you for being here.
Thank you, Dr. Navarro. I'd like to turn the podium over now to Dr. Jonathan Butler, PhD, Master of Divinity, a research faculty member in the Department of Family and Community Medicine. Dr. Butler.
Good evening, and thank you for this opportunity. From enslavement to the present moment, African Americans have experienced a lot of emotional and physical pain and trauma. But in spite of the pain that we've experienced, what has held us together is our resiliency. Now, from a spiritual perspective, that resiliency is similar to that of having faith. Having faith, or this trust in God or a higher being, is the firm foundation under everything that makes life worth living. In spite of the many challenges that we've experienced historically, that we are experiencing in this current moment, it is faith, that faith, our handle of what we cannot see, but what we hope for, which is a just and an equitable society. The act of faith is what our ancestors did to keep us in tune with the reality that we face today. A faith statement that I often reflect on is found in the sacred text that states that the enemy comes to kill, steal, and destroy. But I have come that you may have life and have it more abundantly. That the enemy of racism, the enemy of sexism, xenophobia, and homophobia, and classism, comes to kill our pride. It comes to steal our dignity. It comes to destroy our humanity. But the one who saves us, for me, that's Jesus Christ, comes to give us life and life more abundantly. That means a life that we can ever imagine, a life that is better than the one that we are living. What our ancestors understood was this concept of faith, but they also understood the concept of faith in action. What do? First, we should raise consciousness. Realize that we do experience more and more problems and crises in our lives because of the objective conditions of systemic racism and its oppressions. And it even penetrates in our organizations such as UCSF. Then we should begin to envision an organization in which we all are striving to become. One start is envisioning a warm and safe environment where people of color can feel a sense of belonging. And after we envision this type of organization, we ought to create strategy, an organized, wide, coordinated plan for organizing and educating the long haul struggle to make the vision a reality. These current events have caused so much pain and fear. And we know that fear incarcerates us. Fear paralyzes us. But our faith, a faith that our ancestors have passed down to us, our faith liberates us. Our faith empowers us. And in spite of the rough realities of life, our faith provides us with the audacity to hope for a better future. And so I pray for us all that we will hold on to our faith and remember that the future ahead of us is better than the past that's behind us. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Butler. And we are working to fix the video. Thanks for all who have emailed in. I'd like to turn the camera over now to Dr. Michelle Albert. Dr. Albert is a professor of medicine and president of the Association of Black Cardiologists and the incoming Associate Dean for Admissions in the School of Medicine. Dr. Albert.
Thank you, Dr. Lucey and Dr. King, for the invitation to be part of this discussion. I was invited this evening to talk to you about COVID-19, cardiovascular health, and racism. As many of you in the audience are aware, national data indicate that Blacks comprise approximately 55 of every 100,000 COVID-19 deaths, compared to approximately 25 of every 100,000 deaths for every other racial and ethnic group in the society. Blacks comprise only 13% of the population. We know that the COVID-19 pandemic and its outsized impact for Black people has simply further unmasked and amplified longstanding racial, economic, health, and other inequalities in this country that are rooted in our history of slavery, that precedes the pervasive racism and resulted segregation, especially experienced by Blacks in this country. I know from personal experience and also from my academic life, as my mom was hospitalized and seriously ill with COVID-19 for over 5 weeks. My grandmother also passed away during this time. They live in a multi-generational household in New York. I know that segregation adversely affects COVID-19 impact through limiting socioeconomic mobility, through limited access to quality education, limiting access to care, limiting neighborhood cohesion, weakened neighborhood infrastructure, institutional neglect and disinvestment in poor and segregated communities, and elevated exposure to elevated levels of economic hardship and other chronic stressors. Also, consider the discrimination iceberg, next slide, which characterizes 2/3 of discrimination as covert or symbolic, which includes institutionalized or structural racism, and the remaining 1/3 of discrimination as overt or hate crimes, such as police brutality. We know that one way race is tied to worsened health outcomes, and in COVID, is via underlying cardiovascular conditions, next slide. However, racism and cardiovascular disease are intertwined, as everyday discrimination is tied to subclinical cardiovascular disease. It is associated with worsened levels of inflammation, worsened levels of coronary calcification, all factors that go into propagating cardiovascular disease and heart attacks and strokes. We recently published a paper in Circulation as a follow-up to one of our webinars that we ran with the Association of Black Cardiologists, highlighting COVID-19 health disparities. You see that on this slide. These disparities, as you've already heard, are tied in socioeconomics, access to care, disproportionate burden of chronic medical conditions, racial and ethnic discrimination, unemployment, which is outsized in Black populations. Black populations have 2 to 3 times the unemployment levels of white populations in this country, as well as cultural factors. On the right side of the slide, we suggested solutions, including expanding housing, making dorm rooms and hotels available, providing food, helping with food banks, feeding the elderly, expanding healthcare coverage, closing the digital divide, providing internet access to communities of color who are less likely to have computers and use their phones as a way of accessing the internet, improving safe and viable transportation options, expanding and making testing easily accessible in communities of color, especially in Black communities, and policy aimed at addressing disparities at the local and federal level. I would invite you all to go to the ABC's website at abccardio1.org to visit our webinars. We've had 2 thus far, focused on COVID-19, cardiovascular disease, and cardiovascular disease in diverse populations. We were brought together this evening in part because of the horrible situation we see occurring in this country. And I want to spend my last minute talking about violence and how it affects us at an individual level as well as a societal level. We know that Blacks, for example, have the highest levels of hypertension, highest prevalence of hypertension worldwide. And we know that hypertension is associated with violence. The violence exposure increases the odds of hypertension by 70% in Black youth. We know that it is associated with lack of blood pressure dipping at night. So these are ways through which cardiovascular disease and COVID-19 are intimately intertwined to cause the outsized impact in Black populations. Thank you very much for having me tonight, and I look forward to hearing the other speakers.
Thank you, Dr. Albert. I'd like to now turn the podium over to one of our medical students, Reuben Hogan, who is the president of the Student National Medical Association. Reuben?
Hello, everyone. I'll do my best to keep this brief. I said, my name is Reuben Hogan, and I'm the co-president of SNMA. On behalf of SNMA, I want to share something personal with you, and then invite you to use that as a guiding principle. In August 2014, I arrived at Washington University in St. Louis approximately 3 days after Michael Brown was murdered by police and his body left in the street for 4 hours. On November 24th, 2014, I stood in Ferguson, transfixed, in a crowd of protesters as the decision was announced that Darren Wilson was acquitted. I remember a mother and father that were standing outside their car that night. The mother began this ominous, screeching sort of wail that I have since forever associated with exasperation. And the father slammed his car door shut and began screaming. You see, I remember this event because pain is salient and very hard to forget. So when you find yourself feeling that same pain again, It's terribly frustrating. If you felt that pain previously, you would do everything to make sure that it didn't happen again. That is why it is so telling that we are gathered here feeling this pain yet again for the nth time. It means that not everyone around us felt it before. Now, you don't fix this by giving everyone pain, because we are largely all focused in careers on removing it. Therefore, I urge you to consider this. When you experience pain, you do multiple things. You first start by stopping damage and starting healing. For the Black members in our community who are feeling pain, we invite you to restart that healing process. SNMA will be hosting a communal healing space on Friday from 6 to 8 p.m. via Zoom, and we can get the details to that later. But second, and more importantly, you plan so that you never have to experience that pain again. What this means is that you must unequivocally resolve you will do everything to avoid ending up in the same place as before. That means true, novel, and substantial change. So, if while you are mulling over these events and thinking of your solutions and your solutions still feel too familiar, do different. Now, especially, is not the time to make repeated mistakes. That is all.
Thank you, Reuben. I'd like to turn over now to our fourth-year student, Shakkaura Kemet. Shakkaura.
Hello, good evening, everyone. I want to focus my short time with you this evening on hope, not because I always feel it myself, but because it's what has brought my people through all the darkness that has come before this moment. In the past several weeks, my white friends have been asking me what living in a world with racialized police brutality feels like for me. I struggled for a while to come up with an explanation and then settled for likening my life to a version of the Hunger Games. If you are not familiar, the Hunger Games is a dystopic science fiction story in which people's names are entered into a lottery. Peoples whose names are pulled out are far more likely to be murdered in an ensuing game than they are to survive. For me, life is like that every day. I leave my house for the hospital, the grocery store, or class, and I enter my name in a lottery. If my name is pulled, I am more likely to die and not make it home. So far, my name has not been pulled, but on days when other names are called, I wonder if mine is next. I play this game every day without reprieve, and though it is a centerpiece of my existence, I am aware that it is often invisible to people whose names are never entered into this lottery. That said, I find hope in the fact that I had to come up with this analogy. It means that someone who does not share my experience finally asked me what it's like to be me. I find hope in my father, a white man who at this time last year was at the deathbed of my mother, honoring a marriage that would have been illegal 100 years ago and unfathomable 100 years before that. I find hope in emails and phone calls made by people of all races, religions, and creeds demanding prosecution of the police officers that murdered our fellow citizen. Overall, I find hope in the clear evidence that alongside the growing list of names of people we have lost unjustly, there's another rapidly growing list of names of people who will no longer tolerate this injustice. My hope is that eventually the odds will be in our favor. Thank you.
Thank you, Shakkaura. I'd like to turn now to Dr. Edward Miller, who is a clinical fellow in the Department of Obstetrics and Gynecology in the Maternal-Fetal Medicine Fellowship. Dr. Miller?
Good evening, everyone. It's truly an honor to be speaking with you all tonight. And I'm going to share my experience with you as the only way that I know how, and that's through my eyes as the lens of a Black man. As a Black man in medicine and at UCSF, I've developed a familiarity in being the other. It's just a reality that comes when you're underrepresented in medicine, especially in academic medicine. My department of OBGYN is one of the most diverse GME departments at UCSF. And this year, we just recruited our first Black male resident in more than 25 years. That is life. I'm not complaining. I'm used to it. Life as the other is a normality for many trainees of color. But with the murder of Freddie Gray, the protests, and COVID, I've truly never felt like more of an other at any point in my life than I do right now. These last few months have been immensely difficult for all of us, but just for a moment, I ask that you all think about what it feels to live in America today as a Black man. Think about how it feels to have to wear a mask outdoors at all times. Now, it wasn't too long ago, as the murder of Trayvon Martin showed us, that we found out that a hoodie was triggering for many white people. The combination of a hoodie and a mask feels insurmountable. I've had people not want to get on elevators, cross the street when I'm walking with my mask, and physically recoil. That is my normal today. And as I wrote this, I've also reflected that I realized that I've been isolating myself, staying inside more in order to avoid these interactions. But every day, despite these fears, I've woken up, gotten dressed, and come to work to fulfill my mission and our mission at UCSF. During this time, UCSF actually felt safer because in scrubs and a white coat, society's fear of me was neutralized by something that sheltered minds could more easily wrap their heads around. Then Christian Cooper's life was threatened in broad daylight in Central Park, clear for the world to see, followed by the murder of Freddie Gray the very same weekend. The protest happened, and Facebook, the news, and society as a whole told me just what they thought about me. The residents of color, many of whom I mentor, reached out to me by the droves. We talked, we listened, we cried, but just generally we survived. I was certain that for me, as the only Black male trainee in my department, that my inbox would be inundated with messages, and I was actually nervous because sometimes responding to these emails can be triggering. But I didn't have to worry because in my entire department, I can count on one hand the number of personal emails I receive from people reaching out. So what do I need from you at UCSF? Most importantly, I need you to show up for me. I need you to send me emails or texts that say I don't need to respond and there's no pressure, but that you're there. I need you to know that asking me if I'm all right now is a question that has an obvious answer. I'm not. We're not. When you witness people asking me questions like, how are you? Or you seem depressed in a group of people, I need you to answer for me or with me in solidarity. And if you can't do that, I need you to talk to that person who's asking those types of questions and tell them why it's inappropriate, especially right now. You see, trainees of color are always on display. We're always exposed, and the light that shines on us has never felt so bright as it does right now. I and we need you to step in front of us sometimes and take some of it. To step in front for just a minute and be your own teachers on racism and advocacy for just a moment while we stitch ourselves back together. You see, words matter, but so does silence. And the balance between the two is not for me to teach you, it's for you to learn. So I need you to show up and show out for us. Thank you all so much.
Sorry. I'd like to turn the camera to Dr. Monique LeSarre. Dr. LeSarre is a psychologist and the executive director of the Raffiki Coalition on Wellness and the administrative director of the African American Community Health Network. Dr. LeSarre.
Good evening, everyone. I hope you can hear me and see me. I'm out here at the fields. We were doing testing today for the community. I'm sorry, I'm just a little bit upset from everything that everyone has shared. But I wanted to invite folks to take a breath with me, to just take a big, deep breath. Maybe try again, because I can't exhale yet. So breathing in through our nose and out through our mouth. Please do that with me 2 more times. Breathing in and out. And last one, breathing in and breathing out. Thank you for doing that with me. I wanted to share with you all. Thank you. It's an honor to be invited. I really appreciate my partnerships with UCSF. We are right down on 3rd Street, literally less than a mile away. And what I wanted to say today is very mixed. I wanted to just give you a report of my last week. I've been a little bit in meetings for an hour on the same day of the execution, the state-sanctioned execution, came out on video and on the news with some of your team. And they never stopped to take a moment to acknowledge that that happens. That's not okay. And then since then, I think somebody must have gotten a memo or said, this is how you could be an ally. Because after that, I started to get folks say, oh, hey, Monique, Dr. Mo, how are you feeling? And that felt good, but it also felt to me like they were reading from a script. So let's make sure that we form relationships with people, because in my community, you have to have a relationship to be able to feel that people will feel comfortable and want to come to UCSF. The other piece is that we don't have people from our community that are part of UCSF as patients. So we need more folks, we need to have them feel welcome in the environment. We need to have, you are the second largest employer in the city of San Francisco, and I do work on the anchor institution, work with Director Wiley Liu and with all of the beautiful, amazing people there at the Center for Community Engagement. But I have to say, sometimes they have to send somebody downstairs to literally get us in the building. So we've got to do better. We have to form relationships. And I disagree, I think, a little bit with, I can't remember I think it was one of the students that said that we don't want to cause pain. It's not that I want to cause pain, but I want folks to understand what it feels like to have empathy. And to have empathy, sometimes people have to dig in and remember when they felt some kind of pain. And that's what I work with my students on. That's what I've worked with in restorative justice with folks who have caused harm or murder. If you don't understand, you've never experienced compassion, it's often very hard to show compassion. So sometimes what I'm often wondering is, in the larger dominant culture, is there a lack of compassion? Is there a lack of compassion for European Americans, and is that why it's hard for folks to feel compassion for African Americans and other groups? So I wanted to invite folks to look at their own ancestral lineage and understand where sometimes that lack of compassion might come from, or where those implicit bias messages come from, and to ask instead, not instead of how are you today, but I imagine this must be a hard day, and is there anything you need? And you know, for me, I want to just close with Dr. Cornell West says, love in public looks like justice. So we're not there yet, and we all just want to be loved. We want to show love, and we want to experience to be known and to be cared for. So I just want to say thanks to everyone, and you know, I am sending love. I'm also sending you the message that today is a hard day. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. LeSarre. I'd like to turn the camera to Dean Catherine Gillis, the Dean of the School of Nursing.
Thank you, Dr. Lucey. Speaking on behalf of the School of Nursing tonight, I want to begin by acknowledging that my personal experience varies quite a bit from those who have spoken before me. In that sense, I appreciate being involved in this session this evening, but I realize that my role in this conversation differs from those who have spoken before me. Our school has come together. Our community feels outrage, fear, sadness, and is, I hope, beginning to feel some sense of hope. It is a community that I love, a community I graduated from, and a community I came back to lead. We know that words matter, but that actions will be critical and much more long-lasting. We need to find the right actions, and we know that some of those actions are in the near term, and others will be more important to the beyond. But we must be together. We must be together to heal, to grow, and grow in our commitment, and act on behalf of our most vulnerable members in our community and beyond. And I want to add, we must commit to improving the condition of our democracy. Thank you for inviting me to be here with you tonight, Dr. Lucey.
Sorry. I'd like to turn the camera to Dr. Howard Pinderhughes, who is a professor of social and behavioral sciences and chair of the Department of Social and Behavioral Sciences in the UCSF School of Nursing. Dr. Pinderhughes.
Yeah, thank you, Catherine. You know, I was in the middle of preparing remarks, and I tore them up and threw them out. And I decided to give you a little real talk, just from the heart, because this one hurts in the heart right now. And part of what I've been going through is reflecting on the fact that 1968, when I was 10 years old, I looked out of my window of my bedroom to see my community, Roxbury, on fire because there was unrest because the police had attacked a woman who had come to the welfare office. And I reflected on that, and I think about things, and I feel the words of Fannie Lou Hamer come to my mind. I'm sick and tired of being sick and tired. But more than that, I feel the rage. I feel the rage that I felt in 1968. I feel the rage I felt when I saw Rodney King. I feel the rage I felt when I saw Trayvon Martin. I feel the rage that I felt when I saw Freddie Gray. I feel the rage that I felt when I saw George Floyd on the ground with a police officer's knee on his neck, an absolute metaphor for the 400 years of African American experience in the United States. But I also have moved around and seen a lot of young white people out in the streets, angry with us. That's different than what I saw in 1968, when we as black folks were the only ones out in the street. So this is a moment where I think we need to think about how we are going to follow our young people in this struggle to fundamentally change the system of white supremacy in the United States. That's what we have to talk about. I appreciate the efforts we've made at UCSF over the last 5 years to look at unconscious bias and to look at some of the issues of interpersonal prejudice and racism. But we have to do more. We're not doing enough. And this is in a community where each and every one of you is here because you care. You are healthcare providers dedicated to healing people's physical illness and physical injury. But we live in a society where daily we have systems that injure and ultimately cause the death of many of our people of color. We know that COVID-19 disproportionately kills African Americans and Latinos. We know all of the issues around systemic and structural violence and racism that results in the types of disproportionate morbidity and mortality that we see in our poor black and brown communities. And I have no doubt that each and every one of you who's listening feels that and cares. But you're not doing enough. I'm not doing enough. It's not enough just to do what we do every day. We have to do more. We have to figure out ways to step into the policy realm and policy lane and policy arena and push for policies and changes that prioritize the health and well-being of African American, Latino, and poor whites and poor folks across this nation. But we need to start here in San Francisco, where we have unprecedented numbers of unhoused, predominantly African American folks. So I am here to tell you, you have to do what you're doing, and then you need to do more. Step out of your comfort zone and take action to make change. And what we hear, as black folks, we hear white folks ask us, what do we need in these times? We need you to step up, we need to show up, and we need you to stay there, sustaining your action, and take leadership from us in terms of what we need to do. And moving forward, that means at UCSF, we have an opportunity to really try and transform the way we interact and work with our community to promote the health and well-being of all of the black and brown community in this city. And in closing, I just want to take a moment, just a moment of silence, for George Floyd, for Ahmaud Arbery, for Breonna Taylor, for the countless numbers of folks going all the way back in time to Emmett Till and beyond, who have been victims of racial violence. And take that time to feel that pain, and after that minute, or after that even 5 seconds, come out of that with a renewed sense that you are going to do more.
Thank you, Dr. Pinderhughes. I'd like to turn now to Dean Joe Guglielmo, the Dean of the School of Pharmacy.
Thank you, Catherine. My comments will center upon my very recent experience this past March, associated with a trip to Alabama, organized by Glide Memorial here in the city, and it was for about 20 UCSF healthcare leaders. A white man of privilege, I hoped to see and open my eyes to that which I previously could not see, or perhaps was not willing to see. While a hope was to learn, as a campus dean, my primary goal was to return to UCSF with a greater sense of urgency and activism and increased ability to enact change. Our trip began first day in Birmingham at the 16th Street Baptist Church. As background, on May 2nd, 1963, more than 1,000 grade and high school students opted to leave school and gather at this church and the nearby park. Their goal was to discuss their concerns regarding the city's racial segregation with the mayor. As you may know, these same children were subsequently brutally assaulted by police officers with attack dogs, with over 600 arrests. 4 months later, after this children's protest, a Sunday school session in September, 4 white supremacists bombed the same 16th Street Baptist Church, resulting in the death of 4 little girls. We viewed the memorial on the side of the church and read each of their names. Addie Mae Collins, 14 years old, Cynthia Wesley, 14 years old, Carol Robertson, 14, and Carol Denise McNair, 11. Dr. Martin Luther King described the bombing as the most horrific event in his life. The nation was stunned. However, later in our trip, now in the Capitol in Montgomery, we had the unexpected opportunity to hear the words of a chaplain. Not just any chaplain, but the chaplain for death row. His initial comments to us centered upon his life in the 1960s, and he specifically called out that 16th Street bombing. He informed us the deaths of these little girls disturbed him so deeply, he visually trembled and uttered the words, "I would have killed the bombers if I had the chance." He then paused and he reflected on a time some decades later. A black man, the chaplain was visiting his inmates on death row, 90% of whom were black. A few of the inmates informed him that one inmate in particular was close to death and had specifically requested a visit from the chaplain. The chaplain went to visit this inmate, noting he was one of the very few white prisoners in the facility. The inmate informed the chaplain that he was, in fact, one of the bombers of the 16th Street Baptist Church that ended those 4 little girls' lives. He asked the chaplain for his forgiveness, which he did. While these represent a few of a very emotionally powerful trip, it was a visit to a chapel in the middle of the trip that's particularly relevant for my comments today. That site was in Selma, Alabama, at the Brown Chapel AME, the geographic origin of the 3 Selma to Montgomery protest marches. Southern state legislatures had passed and maintained a series of requirements and practices that disenfranchised most African Americans across the South. That included the right to vote. The African American group, the Dallas County Voters League, had launched a voters registration campaign in Selma, one that had met with great resistance in Alabama. When we visited the chapel, we were honored with presentations by two passionate, committed Black women who are not only members of the church, but active past protesters in these three marches. The first march took place on March 7th, 1965. The chapel's women informed us that the state troopers and county possemen attacked the unnamed marchers with billy clubs and tear gas, an event which became known as Bloody Sunday. The women then described the second march 2 days later. Again, troopers, police, and marchers confronted each other. That night, a white group beat and murdered a civil rights activist minister from Boston. One of the women historians then took a very deep breath with emotion in her eyes, and she said, "Then the help came." I was sitting in the first pew. She pointed at me first and continued her sentence, and she said, "And they look like you and you and you." And she looked, kind of pointed to a number of people there. Her words clearly demonstrated a cautious but renewed sense of hope. For the record, for the third march, close to 8,000 people assembled at the chapel to commence the trek to Montgomery. I know my fellow colleagues who made this pilgrimage understood the importance associated with the support from the help back in 1965. Today, the UCSF response has been gratifying. However, for me, words must become actions as we become the help for today's and tomorrow's crisis. I thank you for this privilege to address our community.
Thank you, Dean Guglielmo. Next, I'd like to introduce Evolve Benton, who is the Program Manager for Equity and Inclusion at the UCSF School of Medicine, and Dr. Lamisha Hill, who is the Director of Multicultural Affairs.
Thank you, Dean Lucey. I will start with some brief reflections, and then I want to invite Evolve to engage us in another guided exercise. I want to call attention to the collective of Black men, Black women, and Black trans folks, and state clearly that this crisis is intersectional, and while one name might be more visible in the media, you must remember to say all of their names. The nature in which Mr. George Floyd's light and his life was extinguished was dehumanizing. And these traumatic events add to the emotional toil and of ongoing racial violence targeted at Black and marginalized communities. As a licensed psychologist, I want to clearly state that the intersections of anti-Blackness, racism, and police violence equates to racial trauma. And as health professionals bound to ethical principles, we must address the ways in which white supremacy culture and medicine and healthcare contributes to the invalidation of racial trauma, further reinforces it, and prevents access to care. When watching nationwide protests, I challenge you, and someone had asked how many people were on the call, all of you 1,600 at the highest point viewers, I challenge you to disengage from the lenses of white supremacy culture and respectability politics that reinforces the good-bad binary, and instead bear witness from a trauma-informed lens. And for those who are with us today, you might be feeling a range of emotions, and I find that in my work that many are activated by the flight, freeze, and fight stress response. So in flight, the desire to turn away, it is difficult to bear witness to suffering, and it's natural to want to return to a state of comfort and homeostasis. I urge you to stay engaged. Freeze, not knowing what to do or say. In the spirit of allyship, these are the moments when those who are not directly impacted by racial trauma must step up. Dr. Ibram X. Kendi states that the opposite of racist is not racist, it's anti-racist. Racism is not static or binary. And for those who are in the spirit of anger and fight, I encourage you to find opportunities to channel this energy into mobilizing for racial justice. Audre Lorde, a Black womanist author and activist, states that caring for myself is not self-indulgence, it is self-preservation, and that is an act of political warfare. And so for those who are experiencing racial trauma and that form of grief, I want to give you explicit permission to indulge and engage in radical self-care. And I want to pass it over to my awesome colleague, Benton.
Thank you, Dr. Hill. Ewald?
Thanks, Lamisha. Good evening, everyone.
Good evening.
Thank you for the opportunity to speak with you all tonight. Here are some tips and reflections I ask for you to ground in tonight, in the morning, or when you're ready. I ask that we all take the moment to notice our breath and give gratitude to it. Just simply notice your breath. I am so thankful for my breath today. I give gratitude to the universe, my ancestors, and the life forces that allow me to show up here now with you today. Although we are practicing social distancing, we are not isolated. Today we recognize that there is so much uncertainty in humanity, but so much certainty in our own personal journeys. Black people, when you get time, I invite you to take time to mourn, to take time to experience joy, to take time to love on your skin and connect with your ancestors. Take some time to investigate any doubt or internal racism that may be coming up. Drink some water, take some deep breaths, and watch a comedy. If you have capacity, take a day off. Non-Black people and people of color, I invite you to take the time to mourn. Meditate on the collective responsibility of Black liberation. Take time to call in your community and talk about Black lives, Black death, and the way Black folks contribute to your life. And when you can, challenge anti-Blackness in your community. White people, I invite you to take time to mourn without asking Black people to process this with you. I ask you to call your community in, reflect on your ancestors' journeys, and talk about Black lives, Black death, and Black contribution. I ask you to be uncomfortable, to hold white fragility back and step into courage. Be courageous enough to challenge anti-Blackness, racism, and process this moment with other white people. As my late grandmother Betty Childers used to say, charity starts at home and then spreads abroad. I give gratitude to you all and send healing to your hearts. Good evening.
Thank you, Ewald. I'd like to now turn to Dr. Matt Buckner, Associate Professor of Radiology. Dr. Buckner.
Thank you. I wanted to say a few words tonight about the power of writing to heal. I don't think I really understood the value of writing for my own personal mental health until I got to medical school. Like any Black person in this country, I'd had plenty of struggles with race and racism personally. But it wasn't until I got to medical school that it became clear how these issues were going to play a role in my professional life in ways I never imagined would be the case. I had people implying to my face or outright saying to my face that they thought I was less capable in any number of ways because I was Black. Grappling with that and the legacy of how this country has systematically devalued Black lives, I didn't know quite what to do with that reality. I started to take a few creative writing courses that were designed for medical students, and writing gave me this essential outlet, a place where I could make sense of what was happening, a sort of 360 perspective on the forces that were shaping my existence and the worlds of those I was now coming into conflict with around race and racism. It gave me a way to take these awful feelings and hold them in my hands, weigh their full measure, and start to see a way forward. Sharing what I had written with a writing group, seeing my words resonate with them, knowing that I wasn't crazy and wasn't alone, it's been the single most important part of my personal wellness practice. Writing matters. Even if no one reads what you've written, it matters. And in this moment that feels impossible, I encourage all of you to write. When you're ready to grapple with what you are feeling, set a timer for 30 minutes, an hour, whatever you can spare, and force yourself to complete a short piece of prose or poem or anything. It doesn't have to be perfect. It just has to be your story, your experience, your insight. Share what you've written with friends or peers if they're ready to listen, Form small groups to discuss what you've done. You can do this, and we need more voices. Words are our agents of change. I've had the privilege of leading a writing group for 10 incredible students of color over the last few weeks, and we're actually going to meet tonight, but we wanted to be here instead. And I have to say, it's been the most inspiring and moving experience for me. Sunday morning, like many of us, I was filled with some pretty intense moments of grief, struggling to find words for this moment. And so I joined a kind of random workshop online and spent 30 minutes working on a brief piece of prose that I'm going to read to ultimate my thoughts. Today, the sky is an impenetrable gray, without shape or form or hint of light. Some mornings here along the Pacific coastline, the colors take your breath away. Round, full pink and orange bands alternating in layers, like a grapefruit split open. But today there is none of that, no contour to this mass of vapor that lingers unmoved. It is a tired sky, a sky that is sorry that you expected more, that it has done its best for now. A sky that promises to double down on that future filled of rainbow delight if you could only spare it this one day's rest. The sky's dreams come hard and fast, drifting to that moment 20 years ago when people once looked up, eyes glimmering with the relentless certainty that the glorious radiance of the future was here and now. It remembers the way the soft light looked on their faces, their pupils narrowed to pinholes against the morning sun. It remembers the growing shape of their hopes and dreams, the diminishing size of their fears. How not even Y2K could hold them back from the slow and relentless march into the future, into a world without war, a world without disease, a world without race. I look up at today's sky and try to forgive it the promises that it made, try to recognize that it can only do its best, try to remember that it could only reflect down the specific and finite wavelengths that it received. I try to remember that there is the light from the sun behind this gray mass of fog, and that without that sun, the darkness would overwhelm. But somehow today that offers no comfort. It is not enough. It has never been enough. The sky has rested enough for one day. There is no time left to sleep. Thank you.
Dr. Buckner. I'd like to turn now to Dean Reddy, the Dean of the School of Dentistry.
Thank you, Dr. Lucey. You know, as I reflect on the times we have today and also on my really gifted and talented colleagues who spoke before me, I'm reaching the conclusion that there are pivotal moments when you know you're on the verge of change, when you know what's right and you know what's wrong and you know it's time to act. Joe led us through, you know, a talk on, you know, one of the world's great experiences, a crucial moment that sparked change when Martin Luther King Jr. led the march from Selma, Alabama to the Capitol in Montgomery, you know, on the third trip, which is a 5-day march across that distance. Now, our world experienced another crucial moment when 30,000 people marched to end apartheid in Cape Town, South Africa. Today, protests continued for more than a week in more than 75 cities across the nation and internationally following the string of murders. And I think this is a crucial moment. The unthinkable deaths are incredibly painful and are a heartbreaking reminder to me that our American systems are stacked against people of color, especially if you're Black. Their deaths are a personal reminder to me of my privilege as a white man in our country, as someone who can freely jog in any community without the fear of being a suspect or gunned down. I've heard from many friends and colleagues and students, the vast majority of whom are people of color, who are hurting and questioning if these injustices will ever end in our country. And I find myself worrying that my words of consoling them are just not enough. I also worry about the people who don't have someone who's reaching out to them. Our society is under stress, from 20% unemployment to over 100,000 dead from the pandemic, now massive demonstrations over police brutality. We need to support Black Americans who are suffering a disproportionate share of this stress. I believe that change is possible. We saw it start in Alabama, we saw it in South Africa, and together we can ensure that we see it now. Today's nonviolent demonstrations are signs of solidarity, The protests are forms of public mourning for the senseless deaths. The protests are a sign that people care deeply, and they're important to recognize and support. Each of us has a responsibility to move the needle, whether that's through increased self-awareness, educating others, nonviolent protests, simply voting, or serving all communities through healthcare. Each of us can make a difference in our world through actions grand and small. But the important issue is that we need to act. And it's more important than ever that we seek not just to understand, but also to act. We're at an inflection point in history. Our actions today will impact our tomorrow. The next generation is watching, and they will ultimately judge what we do. Positive change is possible if we choose to make it happen, and we all must play a part in correcting the social injustice that we see. So I ask, will you please join us in this cause? Will you please check on your colleagues? They need you. And will you ask yourself what else you can personally do to bring about change? You are all in my thoughts during this difficult time, and I hope you and your families stay safe, healthy, and united for change. Thank you.
Thank you, Dean Reddy. I'd like to turn to our final speaker, Chancellor Sam Hogan.
Thank you, Catherine, and thank you for putting together this town hall tonight. I joined it to listen and to hear from all of the wonderful speakers that have gone before. Thank you particularly to the students who have spoken up tonight. So what did I hear? I hear words: fear, trauma, inequalities, segregation, injustice, grief, dehumanizing, pain, pain again, pain yet again, and rage. But I also heard, let's start the healing. Let's move from fear to hope. Let's look for true, novel, and substantial change. Let's bear witness. Let's be anti-racist, not just against racism. Let's show accountability, show up and show out, and let's show empathy, love in public. What I've heard from our community over the last few days is people are looking for action, not words. No matter how elegant the words, we've heard them all before. So people are looking for action. So I'll end the town hall tonight with what I also heard. Let's step out of our comfort zones. Let's step out of our comfort zones and make change. We have a powerful, powerful community here at UCSF, and we can be a force for change. Change in our own community, which is desperately needed, but we can also show leadership across the country, a drive for health equity and a drive for change. So thank you for being with us tonight. I am deeply moved by what I've heard, and the 1,600 people that joined us, I'm sure, are equally deeply moved. Thank you all.
Thank you, Chancellor Hogan. As we leave tonight, I ask that you follow the advice of Evolve and Lamisha. Take time to mourn and experience joy. Dr. Buckner, write, words are our agents of change. Dr. Pinderhughes, this is a moment. Follow our young people and eliminate white supremacy. Our students and our residents, step in front, act differently, recognize rage. Dr. LeSarre, form relationships, understand connections, do better, dig in. And all who have spoken tonight. UCSF is a place where people can change, can grow, and can unite against the forces that rob our communities of their health, their livelihood, their ability to love their family for as long as possible, and their ability to contribute. I hope the experiences you've heard tonight, the wisdom that has washed over us, will help us move in a more deliberate fashion forward to make this a better world for all. Thank you all, and good night.
Thank you.